British show jumping has just made one of the most controversial and potentially important decisions the sport has seen in years. They are banning specific bits and equipment, not reviewing them, not suggesting alternatives, not asking riders to consider change. They are removing them from competition, including the Cheltenham gag with roundings, the Trust Innocence Hackamore combi, the Barris Mullen comfort tandem. Alongside that, they are restricting certain hackamores, banning rope nosebands entirely, eliminating hammerhead spurs, and limiting how much equipment can even be used on a single bridle. And almost immediately, the reaction has been divided. Some riders are frustrated, arguing that these tools are necessary to ride powerful horses safely at the highest levels of the sport. Others are confused, pointing out that the changes seem to come quickly, with little explanation, leaving riders scrambling to replace equipment they had only just invested in. But beneath all of that noise, beneath the frustration, the confusion, and the resistance, there is a much more important question that this decision forces the sport to confront. Not whether these changes are inconvenient, not whether they are perfectly implemented, but whether they are ultimately necessary. Because for the first time in a long time, British show jumping is not just asking riders to think about welfare, they are acting on it. And that changes everything. Because before anything else, we need to absolutely be clear about what these rules are doing. This is not a vague welfare initiative or a symbolic gesture designed to appease public opinion. It is a set of very specific enforceable changes that directly target equipment long associated with increased pressure and control. The Cheltenham gag with roundings is banned, a bit that many riders saw as a practical compromise, offering leverage without the complexity of managing two reins, now removed entirely from competition use. Then comes the combination systems, the Trust Innocence Hackamore combi, the Barris Mullen comfort tandem, both designed to apply pressure across multiple areas of the horse's head, the mouth, the nose, and the poll. Systems that were often marked as innovative or even kinder alternatives, but which in reality layered multiple forms of control into a single piece of equipment. Now they are no longer allowed. And the changes don't stop there. Hackamores themselves are being restricted with clear limits on their construction. No metal nose pieces, no excessively long shanks, and stricter rules about materials. Because the idea that removing a bit automatically makes something softer is no longer being accepted without question. Rope nosebands banned outright, not adjusted, not redefined, removed. Because their function, tight, unyielding, and highly restrictive, cannot be reconciled with a sport that claims to prioritize the horse. Multiple nosebands are no longer allowed, because layering restriction on top of restriction is now being recognized for what it is, an escalation of pressure, not refinement of communication. And even Spurs, specifically hammerhead designs, have been removed, acknowledging that pressure applied through the rider's legs is just as significant as pressure applied through the bridle. And when you step back and look at all of these changes together, it becomes impossible to see them as random. They are not isolated decisions. They are not arbitrary bans. They are part of a clear and deliberate direction, a move away from equipment that increases mechanical pressure, and towards a system that is attempting, perhaps imperfectly, but importantly, to reduce it. And this is where the conversation becomes more uncomfortable, because it's very easy to focus on what riders are losing, the tools, the options, the familiarity. But it's much harder and much more important to focus on what the horse has been experiencing all along. Because the reality is that many of these pieces of equipment now being removed were never natural. They were not passive. They were not simply stronger versions of the same idea. They were tools designed to increase pressure. to create faster responses, to override resistance. And while they may have been used with good intentions, or even skillfully in certain hands, their function does not change. Pressure applied to the mouth, the nose, the poll is still pressure. And when that pressure is layered, multiplied, or intensified, it has an effect on the horse, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. Supporting these changes is not about criticizing riders. It is not about pretending that every use of stronger equipment was abusive. It is about recognizing that the system itself has, for a long time, allowed levels of pressure that we are only now beginning to question. And that questioning is not a weakness, it is progress. Because every advancement in equestrian sport, from improved veterinary care to better training methods, has come from a willingness to reevaluate what was once considered normal. And this is no different. Of course, there is resistance, there always is, because change, especially when it affects how people ride, how they train, and how they compete, is never comfortable. And the arguments against these rules are familiar, that some horses are too strong to ride without this equipment. The safety will be compromised, that experienced riders know how to use these tools responsibly. And again, these are not baseless concerns, but they rely on a critical assumption that the current system is already correct, that the reliance on these tools is necessary rather than learned, and that without them, effective riding becomes impossible. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the reliance on stronger equipment is not a requirement of the horse, but a reflection of the system we have built around them? Because if removing harsher tack makes riding more difficult, if it requires better timing, better balance, better training, then perhaps the issue is not that the rules go too far. Perhaps it is that the sport has relied on these tools for far too long. Because at its core, this is not just about banning equipment. It is about redefining what good riding looks like. For years, control has been prioritized: consistency, precision, immediate response. And those things matter. But the way they are achieved matters too. Because true horsemanship is not about how effectively we can enforce a response. It is about how clearly we can communicate it. And when equipment becomes the primary means of achieving that response, something is lost. The nuance, the feel, the relationship. Removing harsher tack does not eliminate control. It changes how that control is achieved. It shifts the responsibility back onto the rider, back onto the training, back onto the time and understanding required to develop a horse that responds not because it must, but because it understands. And this is not happening in isolation. Across equestrian sport, there's a growing awareness that welfare cannot just be a sentiment. It has to be visible, it has to be measurable, and it has to be enforceable, because the world is watching, and not just from within the sport, from outside it, from people who may not understand every nuance of riding, but who can recognize discomfort, tension, and restriction when they see it. And those perceptions matter, because without public trust, equestrian sport does not have a future. So maybe the question isn't whether British show jumping has gone too far. Maybe the question is whether the sport, for too long, has not gone far enough. Because if removing harsher tack makes riding more difficult, more technical, more dependent on true horsemanship, then that is not a weakness. That is a correction, and maybe finally a necessary one.